Hey everybody, how's it going? Well, welcome back. It's been, it's been about a month, maybe more than that. You know, it's a beautiful day in Edinburgh. I'm drinking an Ethiopian coffee. It's sunny outside. I went for a walk. It's good to be alive today. But, it's been a while. And it's been a while because, well, the truth is, I have a kid in nursery, and I get sick a lot, and I didn't know before I had a kid, and before my kid went to nursery that, well, he'd be sick all the time. Because nurseries are these, breeding grounds where viruses just get born every day, and it's crazy. And kids are just snotting in each other's eyes and spitting on each other's faces, and then you end up in bed for 3 weeks. But also, I just find these reviews really they take up a lot of time because you have to kind of articulate yourself well enough, and it's so hard. You get inside your head, you start thinking about am I really saying this accurately? Does this really make sense? Does anybody really care about any of this? Well, those are all valid thoughts. And yeah. Anyway, in the meantime, I've actually started an Instagram account that's all book reviews, and I've just been doing book reviews on my Instagram account instead of on YouTube. Basically, it's just, for me, it really helps to sort of just give little bite-sized reviews and thoughts of just books I've been reading. So if you have Instagram, follow 1,000 Lives Book Reviews on Instagram, and give me some likes. Give me some thoughts if you've read some of the books that I've been posting about. I actually just made a post about the books of Jacob, which I'm going to be reviewing today. So, that's a bit of an update of where I've been and where I'm at. Today I'm reviewing a very big book called The Books of Jacob. I actually believe it's pronounced The Books of Jakub in the Polish, but I'm not Polish, and it feels a bit weird and pretentious to pronounce it the Books of Jacob, so yeah, I'm just going to say Books of Jacob. Books of Jacob is written by Olga Tokarczuk, this lovely lady on my TV screen here. Tokarczuk is a Nobel Prize winner, and winner of a bajillion other prizes. She's basically a mastermind of literature, and she's kind of become my favorite author of 2022. The Books of Jacob is a book about everything. It's one of those just maximalist books that seems to cover every single topic. But the primary topic of Books of Jacob is actually a figure who appears in the 18th century whose name is Jacob Frank. And now Jacob Frank is this he's a cult leader, sure, but it's interesting how she sort of weaves together all of his followers' perspectives, but without ever really touching on Jacob Frank's perspective as this movement of Frankism takes over Eastern Europe from Wallachia, which is formerly Romania, to Greece and Podolia, which is formerly Poland, Russia, and how this one man basically synthesizes Christianity, Islam, and Judaism into one sect of its own sort of insular religion, and how over 50,000 followers follow suit of that. It's absolutely crazy. The book takes a few different perspectives. So the main perspectives are from this one sort of older matriarch in this Jewish family, this family of Talmudic Jews. What does that mean? Talmudic is kind of so basically after the destruction of the Jewish temple in the year 70 CE, the Jews they didn't have this center in which to gather for worship, the center of sacred rites and animal sacrifice and rituals anymore. So they turned to the rabbinic writings, which were to become sort of the spirit that animated their community. And the Talmud was that text. The Talmud became a sort of allegorical temple where Jews would meet around the text and around a way of living that was no longer a building but a community. And then there was also another sect of Judaism that was called Kabbalistic, that followed the Kabbalah, which is like this mystical trend in Judaism that really interpreted the Torah, which is the 5 main books of Judaism, in an allegorical, metaphorical, existential way. And they tended to be more supernatural and more mystical. And so this group of Jews in the beginning of the books of Jacob, at this big wedding, are Talmudic, Kabbalistic Jews, and they are in this big family that's kind of described as a sort of beehive in this big kind of labyrinthine home. And there's this matriarch whose name is Yente, and she is dying, inconveniently dying at this wedding. And so they basically like cast a spell, because these kinds of Jews, they kind of cast spells. And they write the Hebrew word for waiting down on a little tiny scroll. Yente swallows it, which they don't intend for her to do that. She swallows the scroll, and then the scroll of waiting puts her into this like coma, where she's sort of out of body, sees all that will happen in the history of the world, but in particular, the history of her grandchild, who is the protagonist of the book, Jacob Frank. So you see all of this like rising cult all throughout Eastern Europe from the perspective of somebody in this out-of-body, comatose experience, a very like mystical experience, where the dead sort of roam in the wind through the fields and have this sort of bird's-eye view of the events that are taking place on the terrestrial landscape. Another main perspective is a character named Naaman. Naaman is one of Jacob Frank's most beloved disciples, although I don't know if that feeling is mutual, or it sort of seems along the book that Naaman has a sort of one-way love affair with Jacob, and Jacob somehow always is casting Naaman to the side, even though Naaman is sort of his most loyal follower. Loyal in a certain sense, as you read the book, you'll see what I mean. Naaman writes his scraps. He writes all of the things that happen to this cult and to the community from when they have their small beginnings in Turkey and in Greece, and as they travel to Poland and they collect more and more followers, and then when they start their own sort of commune called Ivany, which is kind of, you start to see these weird sexual practices kind of come out of nowhere, really. Jacob starts to make up sort of his own theology of transgression. That feels like the only way of putting it. This way of connecting with the divine, which completely eradicates all of earthly laws. And so in Ivany, there's like no prohibitions about like adultery. There's no prohibitions about incest. All taboos are taken off the table, but they're sort of still politically hiding them from the authorities, because they kind of want to be recognized as legitimate by the Christians, and eventually they get baptized. In so doing, they kind of legalize themselves. Baptism becomes a sort of a staple of their own legitimacy in the eyes of the state. Anyway, so Naaman is writing these scraps as he's sort of, you can see him slipping more and more into this like way of thinking that is so bizarre to the reader, so foreign and alien, because you start to see how he becomes more and more loyal, and in his loyalty he becomes more and more just submerged in a fanaticism that is like totally off the rocker. Like you start to see him. I think it begins really in these sort of moments where Naaman describes the Shekinah falling. The Shekinah is like God's falling presence, descending presence into Jacob Frank's body. And these rituals happen when Jacob is naked and he's sweating and he's speaking in these tongues, and everybody's sort of laying hands on him, and he gets an erection, and then he falls and has these like crazy spasms and sort of paroxysms, and Naaman is like, oh my God, this is like the Shekinah falling in this space. And then from there you see Jacob kind of saying like, I am God's messenger. I am the spirit of these former messiahs that have now reincarnated, and they start to like have these strange like breast milk feeding ceremonies where God is seen as a woman and who feeds God's children, and so they have like a woman stand on a table, and then all the men come and they like take turns like feeding from her breast. And Naaman does this, and he does it with a feeling of guilt and a feeling of being conflicted in it, because he's coming from this like Talmudic Jewish background where none of that's allowed, and then all of a sudden this Jacob Frank friend of his and mentor sort of figure for him is also tugging him to break all of these laws that once had meant something to him. What's interesting about it is this grudge against creation that Naaman talks about. This feeling of being dissatisfied with the current state of the world. This feeling of of the world is broken, and it's shadow and it's darkness, and there's this belief that there's these divine sparks like little slivers hidden on the margins of the universe, and that only through transgressing the order of things can the spirit break in, because the spirit is sort of this irrational presence that is like a battering ram that tries to break in through the outside bubble of the world and pop inside and ram inside, and in doing so rupture the sort of status quo and the way things are. And there's a definite allure in Jacob's mentality in that it's so transgressive, it's so anarchic, but it's also really universalizing because it brings together all these major sibling religions, and it's you can tell why so many people gravitated to somebody like Jacob Frank, because he's charismatic. There's scenes in the book, there's chapters, there's little portions in the book where he's dancing and he's singing and he's smiling and he's playing music and he's joking and he's making people laugh. But what's strange is, even though he's doing these things, he's doing it with a type of rigor and but also a sort of jadedness and a cynicism against the authentic and honest way of being that a lot of people have. And so he jokes at other people's expense. He makes people feel uncomfortable, and so they sort of laugh at themselves. And as you read, you start to see how desperate Jacob becomes for attention, for devotion from his followers, and how he really is just this child who's like kind of a playful kid trying to find attention in this really broken and untrustworthy world. Yeah. As much as the story is about the figure of Jacob and the figure of Naaman and the figure of Yente, or I should say maybe the spirit, the consciousness of Yente, the book is actually about language. It's about words and how words create worlds. It's about, there's so many parts in the book where there's curses that are laid on people from the Talmudists curse the anti-Talmudists, the contra-Talmudists, which are the Frankists. The Frankists curse them back, and there's like blessings that are put on people, and there's names. Oh my God, the book. Basically, every character in the book changes their name at some point, and it becomes really hard to follow because there's so many characters in this book. And to even imagine how Tokarczuk weaves all of these characters in, and they come back like 300 pages later, these minor characters. The book is like 1,000 pages long, and there's like hundreds of characters, and all of them change their names, and all of the names mean something. So it's like on top of the impetus of the story that moves forward toward the gradual like arrest of Jacob Frank and how he gets put into the monastery, and there's tons of things that happen, right? But it's actually about words and the power of words to shape reality. For example, even how I mentioned how Yente swallows the word waiting. That word in the prologue of the book, it's absorbed into her flesh, but the sort of the accidents of the words are absorbed and disappear, but the substance or the essence of the words, they remain, and they take shape, and they become reality, and that reality is a metaphysical reality of waiting to die, and she waits to die for the entire book, and like, you see her at some points, I mean, her family hides her into a cave that's shaped in the letter Aleph, the Hebrew word for, Hebrew letter for A. And it's just like, everything is words. Even the cave spells out a letter, and apparently there's always, caves in the world that spell out all of the letters in the alphabet. And so the world itself is sort of subterraneously in the very like center of it. It's made and created upon language, and language is what allows us to sort of even exist in the world. It's very interesting cosmology, really. It reminds me of just the Christian Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. There's this like speech enables the creative being to take shape, and speech allows understanding, that allows logos, the animating principle of reason to happen. Yeah, I'm just going to read a part from when the Shekinah is falling on Jacob, and he's and this is from Naaman's perspective as he's sort of watching Jacob become possessed by the Spirit. We were putting him to trial by the Spirit, trying to determine whether he could endure such an onslaught. And we weren't asking for an ordinary sign, as before, for the comfort of our hearts. We were asking for action, for an arrival in our world, our filth, our gloom. We set out Jacob like bait, like a dazed lamb before a wolf. Our combined voices rose, then finally turned shrill, as though we'd become woman. Tova rocked back and forth. I felt nauseated, as though I had eaten something spoiled, and I felt I would faint. Only Reb Mordecai simply stood there at ease, his eyes raised high towards the ceiling, where there was a little window. Maybe he thought the Spirit would come in through that small window. The Spirit circles around us like a wolf around those trapped in a cave, I said. It seeks the smallest hole to get in through to those weak figures living in the shadow world. It sniffs, it checks each crack, each sliver, smelling us inside. It moves like a lover consumed by desire, in order to fill with light those delicate creatures like underground mushrooms. And people, little, fragile, lost, leave him signs, marking stones with olive oil and tree bark and door frames. People make signs on their foreheads in oil so that the Spirit might enter. Why does the Spirit like oil so much? Why all that anointing? Is it to make it slippery, so it will be easier for it to go inside of matter? Jacob asked at once, and all the students burst out laughing, and I did too, because it was so bold, it could not be unwise. There's something too about the act of writing the books of Jacob for Tokarczuk that's interesting, in that it's, when thinking about words and how words enact a type of living, a type of animating, a type of giving life to something, breathing life into something, and how the book is actually told from the perspective of this person who's on the threshold of death, and about a person who's already dead. Like Jacob Frank has been dead for quite some time. And Tokarczuk took, I think, 7 years of research to write the book, and 10 years in total to write the book. And she wrote Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, which is a great read. It's actually right here on my shelf. I'll show you it. I read this book before reading Books of Jacob. Highly recommend this book as well. Mystical detective, crime novel. She wrote it in order to fund magnum opus project, the Books of Jacob. So if you really like, I mean, you know what, actually, I won't say that. Drive Your Plow is actually such a different book from the Books of Jacob that it really doesn't even feel like the same writer, which also goes to show how volatile Tokarczuk is with her voice. Like, she just has a breadth and a range of voices that she can conjure up just by like sitting and immersing herself in different worlds. And that's exactly what she does for Books of Jacob. She travels to all of the places that Jacob Frank visited for 7 years. She researched, and that comes through in the book. And so, in thinking about like how writing in itself gives life to something, there's parts in the book which talk about the dead and how the dead cease to exist when we cease to remember them. Reminds me of like the Pixar movie Coco, when in that Mexican culture, you sort of like remember. You have pictures of the dead in your home to keep them existing in the afterlife, and there's a type of continuity between our awareness of what has passed before us and the existence of that thing at all. And I just want to read this part of the book because it really is interesting. The section is called Of Yente's Measurement of Graves. And I'm just going to skip down a bit to the part that I'm interested in right now. But what reason do they have for measuring the graves and cemeteries? After all, the dead are not contained in their graves. Yente has learned this only now. However, after plunging thousands of wicks into wax. Graves are, in fact, altogether pointless, since the dead ignore them and roam. The dead are everywhere. Yente sees them all the time, as if through glass, for however much she might like to join their ranks, she can't. Where is this? It's hard to say. They behold the world as if from behind a window pane, inspecting it and always coveting something inside it. Yente tries to figure out what the faces they make mean, likewise their gestures, and in the end she gets it. The dead would like to be talked about. They are hungry, and that is their food. What they want from us is our attention. And Yente notices something else, that attention is inequitably distributed. Some people are spoken about a great deal, with myriad words pronounced about them. Of others, people utter not a single word, nary a syllable, ever. Those dead will flicker out after a while, moving away from the glass, disappearing somewhere into the back. There are a great many of that latter group, millions of them, completely forgotten. No one even knows they lived on earth. There is no trace of them, which is why they are freed faster and depart. And maybe that's a good thing. Yente would depart as well, if only she could. If only she weren't still bound by that powerful word she swallowed. The little piece of paper is gone, and there's no trace left of the string. It's all dissolved, and the tiniest particles of light have been absorbed into matter. All that remains is the word like a rock that reckless Elisha Shore employed to tether Yente. The word tethers her. There's a tethering, there's a sort of enchainment with words to reality. They connect us to our reality. The dead stay in the world as we speak about them. It's interesting. And this whole act of writing 1,000 pages about a dead person, it's all about what we bring into our awareness. What we read, it really brings, for me, it back to how many, I mean, the name of my channel is 1,000 Lives Book Reviews, and it really does kind of remind me of that way of thinking, just about like how every book that you read is another life that you live, another life that's brought out of the shadowy backdrop of history into our present, immediate attention. Final thoughts, what will I say? I mean, yeah, lots of characters, really hard to keep track of them, lots of history. If you get bogged down by like a lot of detail, long sections of just describing markets and squares and religious beliefs and I don't know, just stuff like that, I feel like it would be hard to follow. But if you're really into that, if you're really into like a sort of historical fiction that feels like you're reading the Bible, but it's so much more easy to read and interesting. So I don't know if that sells you on it or not, but for me, it's probably up there in my top like 3 books of the year so far. If not my favorite book I've read so far this year. So I can't recommend it enough. Yeah, anyway, again, follow me on Instagram, 1,000 Lives Book Reviews on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. And have you read Books of Jacob? If so, tell me what you think in the comments below. Cheers, guys.